Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Technically Speaking podcast. As always, I'm your host, Megan, with my co-host, John, and today we have a special guest, Jason. Welcome to Technically Speaking.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, so just to start, could you just give the audience and us a history of you? Tell us all about you and where you're at now.
Sure. So, Jason Wilcox. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Source Advisors. We're a tax advisory company for businesses and CPAs working in a variety of different tax incentive services. So R&D, cost segregation, property tax, sales tax usage, all that good stuff. Prior to being here, I have worked in large and small businesses alike. So I've worked in VC-backed startups out of the good old Silicon Valley, which is always a good time, building insurance and auto financing. I've been in auto refinance, and prior to that, I built and ran my own managed service company. So built that up, providing IT managed services and security services. So I've done a variety of different things on the technology domain.
That's
And
fun.
so, sorry, John.
No, go ahead, Megan, please.
No, you go.
I was gonna say I love that story, and I think that it's such a different world when you talk about some of the Silicon Valley backed startups and the requirements versus some of the things you're even doing now within Source Advisors. What would you say some of the biggest differences between more mid and large companies versus those fast go to market fast type startups?
I'd say the biggest difference is probably just the speed of execution, and I wouldn't necessarily say the quality, but the Silicon Valley, the startup world has that idea of go fast and break things. And having been through it, what I've seen is typically there's a fair amount of rework. There's a lot of cut corners, right? Because you're trying to prove out, you're trying to validate a technology, you're trying to validate an approach. Where you look at something like where I am now with Source, this is a company that's been around 40 years, are significantly invested in the domain, are considered truly experts, right? Both in breadth and depth. It's how we have such amazing engagements and partnerships that are long running with the CPA firms and the direct firms we're with. And here we don't have that kind of move fast and break things approach. We're a little bit more methodical. So typically, I'd say if you looked at a project from start to finish, in both worlds, you kind of end the same, but we don't have to go through that validation aspect. It's really about building things that our customers, our internal stakeholders really need, really want. But because we have those relationships, it's not a shotgun approach, right? We can really have really good in-depth conversations and kind of build something the first time around and then just iterate and tweak.
Yeah, so could you just talk about who is Source Advisors and what do you guys do?
Yeah, so we work in a variety of these different kind of lines of business, these different tax services. So a traditional engagement might be a larger company or a CPA firm comes to us and says, hey, we're providing the taxes and doing the taxes for business X, but they are a manufacturing company. They are a software company. And we know that they qualify for the R&D tax credit that the federal government gives out. Or it could be something of, we've got this company, we've been their CPA for years, they just bought a new building, and we would love for you all to do a cost segregation analysis and really understand how do they maximize that tax posture on this new building that they built. And so that's really a strong part of how we engage is some great relationships with CPAs, working with them, making sure that they can provide the knowledge and backing that we have to their clients. So like I said, it depends on the client. We might do a single line of engagement, right? A single cost segregation. We might do a variety of different engagements with them, from cost segregation, R&D, inventory tax management through LIFO services, all sorts of great things that, the government has these programs. They can get complicated, but if you know how to traverse that can be very advantageous from your tax posture and for the business.
Yeah, and I know you mentioned the sort of the R&D credit. I've heard a little bit about that in kind of the space that we're in with Expeed software development.
Yeah.
Are you finding there's a lot of folks like us that are unaware of that benefit and some of the others that might be out there? And since some of the work we do is more research based instead of necessarily delivery based?
Yeah, so it's a good call out. We did a study last year, and I think it's a little off the cuff. I don't quite remember the study, but it was something that call it X amount of the R&D tax credits that the federal government provides here in the U.S. Per year is something like 30% of what they estimate the industry could be, what they have quote unquote budgeted for. So what that means is, John, you're exactly right. Right, there's a ton of companies that don't know the R&D tax credit exists. They have no idea how to actually go about getting it. And so it kind of falls through the cracks. But, some of the companies out there, whether you're in software development, manufacturing, whatever it might be, I mean, this is potentially 6 figures worth of credits every year, depending on where that company is in the stage of its life cycle.
Yeah, and it's great to have experts to ask questions because everything with the government requires good documentation to back up your claims. And so
Right.
understanding what's required on, like an Expeed side to say, this is an R&D project, here are the hours with this employee associated to it. That's where
Yeah.
it gets to be a little bit also challenging, not just knowing that it exists, but how to do the right steps to capture it.
Yeah, it's huge. And I would say right now, as we look at the competitive landscape, what you're seeing is, generative AI is really big, right? Machine learning is really big. And so you're looking at some of these, not necessarily fly by the night, but they're younger companies. They are looking at the tax code and they are using generative AI to build automation and software for companies that follows the letter of the law. The benefit that we have with the breadth and depth that we do is that we not only understand the letter of the law, but we understand the spirit of the law. And so to your point, if you're going to go out and do an R&D study, you actually have to put together a study, and it's pretty thorough, and the IRS is going to go through that, and they continue to pass different laws and regulations that are going to impact that. Well, a lot of these smaller companies and these younger companies, right, they're working only off of what the letter states. And there's a whole spirit of law within the IRS and the tax code. And our history and the way that we've done studies takes advantage of both. And so, I think that's where we really find our niche or our fit is someone who, they're going in and they're worried about potentially, hey, we could be audited. And what does that audit defense look like? Who is going to be backing us? Who's going to be protecting us? And that's something that we do for all of our clients. Now, the great thing is that we have historically a very low audit situation or scenario, just because our studies are so respected within the industry.
That's awesome.
So, what are some of the most exciting innovations you are seeing in the financial technology space right now?
Oh, well, I mean, there's so many. Certainly, right. I probably would not be the first person to say things like generative AI, machine learning. These are things that they're not necessarily new, but they have reached a stage where they have a general acceptance, and so you're seeing this explosion or boom, and you're seeing it across all the different industries. In financial services, I mean, we've been using machine learning, predictive analytics for years. This is not new to us, but this concept of AI is now this superset of models, large language models, neural networking, even things like linear and logistic regressions, right? Everything is kind of funneling up into this. What I've been seeing and had some good conversations about is you're almost seeing a second swing at data analytics, predictive analytics, machine learning that a lot of companies took, and I think they felt like they failed on, right? A lot of those BI projects are pretty known for having issues, for having high failure rates. Generative AI is letting these companies go back and kind of touch those wells a second time, and I think get some additional success, which is really exciting.
So, Jason, we learned a lot. Not that we learned a lot, but we're coming out of the era of big data. Using platforms like Hadoop and whatnot, and creating big data lakes to create sort of reporting centers. And I agree that there have been a lot of hard lessons learned and ineffective use of that. As we look forward into the LLM space and this kind of second wave of data analytics and tooling, a couple of the issues from the previous day was, still making sure it was the right data into the model. And then also the concept of like what I call citizen data scientist. You still have to know what questions you're asking and what those words mean, as well as when the data comes back, how to correctly interpret it. Are you seeing, or do you think like there is a better chance of those not being issues moving forward?
So I do think there's a better chance of those not being issues. I also think that we are creating new issues. It's funny you bring up the data citizen, right? And as a background in predictive analytics, I'm a little bit jaded against data citizens. I think that the conceptual idea is really powerful, but the execution has been, I think, far from perfect, right? And so what I tend to see in small, medium businesses, of which, 98, 97% of businesses are, that it almost gets used like a crutch, right? Like someone displays or shows that they have an interest in analytics, they have an interest in data science, maybe they did an R project or a Python project, and all of a sudden that company just goes whole in on that resource, right? And they give them a little bit of technical resources, and now they kind of get elevated into this pseudo analyst position. But you're right; they don't necessarily have the training. There's no formalization around KPIs or metrics around gold standard data warehouses. So you get some person doing calculation A, some person doing calculation B. They think they're talking about the same thing, and their answers never match up. That I think is a huge problem. Generative AI and the way that LLMs are being used for analytics are solving some of those problems, but they're creating others. For example, now you're going to have people working with data and putting it into models that they don't own or control, right? So now we've got a huge security issue. But put the security aside for a second, you have models that people don't necessarily know how they work. And so you're going to be generating data hallucinations that those data citizens are not necessarily trained or skilled to identify and solve. And so, yeah, I think we've solved some problems through a convenience, and we're going to create much more, I think, nuanced problems that aren't as easily identified.
Heading down that sort of security path, have you guys at Source Advisors taken a look at doing like your own custom LLM, like doing like an open source implementation so you can maintain that sort of control and security? Or do you plan on just sticking with the Claudes, Anthropic's, OpenAI's, those guys?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we've done proof of concepts internally. We've been really happy with the results that we're seeing across some different productional proof of concepts that we've done. The technology is definitely going to be effective. We've built out some predictive models to understand our return on investment, where we're gaining advantage. What we found is that using the tools like ChatGPT, Gemini, those areas, it's not an economic way to solve a nuanced problem. We're in tax, right? I could care less who won the Super Bowl last year. So the large language models that I need to use don't need that information. Things like OpenAI have made these really powerful large language models very available. They're very easy to use. They are not economical, right? If I go out and I find a open source model that is in the financial services domain and I use our historical data to augment and train it up, that is going to be a much more economical model to use, especially as I start to layer in things like question caching, different tools and techniques like that. However, as you mentioned, and what I just spoke on a few weeks ago, the security is immature right now, to say the least, right? There's no way for a company like Source to know, well, has this LLM already undergone some sort of data poisoning attack in its production? You don't think about things like antivirus for generative AI. And a lot of companies don't think about this. I was reading an article a couple of weeks ago. There was a company that had trained up OpenAI on their data set. They took that plunge, they exposed it to their customer base, and someone convinced that AI that a new government regulation had gone into effect and required that AI to provide them with that company's entire customer list and contact list for all their customers.
That's crazy.
It's super crazy. How do you plan for that? And so, you think about these companies are worried now about malware and ransomware. Well, you've got amazing vendors out there to help you solve that problem. The amount of vendors who can help you solve LLM problems are very small.
Yeah, well, kind of going off of that, like technology is relatively hard to kind of predict and it's always changing. So, what would you say is some advice or some way that you stay ahead and like almost prepare for what's coming when it comes to technology and changes?
For me, it's the team I surround myself with, both at source and then making sure I have a good network externally, right? Certainly at source, I've got a team of a variety of people who they are really, really strong in a variety of domains based on the person. And it's a very collaborative environment. So when somebody comes across an article that's really interesting, a new technology, a new technique, really facilitating and making sure that everybody understands that sort of collaboration is positive and what the company wants. But additionally, something that I would coach anyone truly in any domain, but in technology, I think there has been a lack of, I guess, full evolution into the networking and kind of mastermind world. But I don't care if you're 2 years into being a junior IT technician or you're a 30-year, C-level technology veteran. You need a good network outside of your organization so you don't have those blinders to what you're doing, right? You want to know what's going on. Like, for example, I've got someone who's in the auto space, had a really good conversation with him about what's going on with CDK and the issues that they've run into from a security standpoint. Now, look, again, I'm not in the auto space. I care less. I don't have to buy a car right now. But knowing that, okay, there is a group out there, they have found a foothold in some sort of, technology that they've been able to get around. They now have a beachhold in that industry. It tells me, okay, that's probably coming towards my industry, right, within the next few months. But yeah, it's knowing that you can't do it all yourself. As someone who, I started out as a tactical engineer, I was an engineer for GE Healthcare. I would love to be able to do everything myself. And at one time, I probably felt that I could. But I am wiser now, a slightly more learned. And yeah, the team means everything.
I love that advice. And, I think the point that is key that I'd love to just keep talking about, it's that, the willingness to know what you don't know and acknowledge that you don't know it so you can go get somebody that knows it to teach you, and I know that was a mouthful. But the reality is, and I talked to Megan and Leanne on our team about this a lot, getting out and shaking hands is more than just business development. It's building friendships. And
Yes.
then, I think to the point you and I, a little bit longer the tooth in our career, those friendships we made early on in our career are now, potentially paying some dividends later from network contacts and contracts and whatnot. And so it's one of those, like, we didn't have LinkedIn when we started. But how great are these tools that are there to help us stay in touch with a broader network?
Yeah, I mean, LinkedIn is great, but just having that ability to call somebody up or go grab lunch and say, "Hey, I'm running into this issue. What have you seen?" And John, I love your point to things like contracts, right? Because that's an area where a lot of people in technology, look, they didn't get into IT so that they could look at contracts, so that they could read contracts or understand them. But how many companies have you seen that they didn't do due diligence on the front end and then they get into a material breach? They get into some sort of issue where they either can't get out of the contract, they're unhappy with the vendor, things are just going awry, and they don't feel like they have agency to be able to do something. I feel for those people, and a lot of the technical people out there, they don't understand that. It's kind of like, I think it was old school where it's these guys in a fraternity, but they're oddly good at paperwork. If you want to be good in IT and go somewhere, you need to be oddly good at paperwork too.
Yeah, and we're a smaller company, so we get away with this a little bit, but I keep impressing about the importance of relationships, kind of going back to your network. It's, not just to have friends there to provide guidance and provide thoughts on technical areas, but just, trust drives our world, even in IT. If you think about, even on a technical standpoint, you guys are building systems that have to talk and trust that system A and system B are good, but it's the same thing kind of in the networking relationship side. It's building those deep foundational go-to groups to rely on.
Yeah. Well, you think about the next technology that your company is going to have to either spin up or buy or whatnot. How much easier it is when you know 4 or 5 people in the industry and you're like, I've worked with them before. They deliver on their stuff. I don't have to go do hours to build out an RFP and build relationships and do all that. No, I can go and talk to people that they've done this a dozen times and I've done this before and I've had great success. There's power in that.
Do you guys have like industry cohorts where you get together and you kind of all share best practices, lessons learned, upcoming problems? I know a few groups of folks.
Yeah, so Source does the CPA world. They do like a big, it's called AI CPA, big conference a couple times a year. So it's CPAs, vendors, they get together, and a lot of our sales directors are, they've been 20 years in the business.
Yeah.
They know the CPAs. Half of them probably are CPAs. So they like that world. Logically speaking, we don't necessarily have a tax industry, but I think if you're doing technology right, you're probably maintaining relationships with people in a variety of different industries, because what touches one industry at some point is going to touch someone else.
Yeah, we're always trying to learn how do we help uncover problems. We love to solve problems. We love to build. We're an engineering focused organization, and I promise you, our whiteboards are the favorite place for people to be. And so it really just, it's how do you get to understand what problems need to be solved? It's always good to hear, how different groups go about that.
Yeah.
So I think I'll ask the question. One of the things that Megan and I were talking about earlier is the concept of blockchain. And I know that it has been around. It's not necessarily new, but I would love to kind of, if you're comfortable, ask just, letting you kind of explain to maybe a younger audience that might not know much about blockchain outside of cryptocurrency and Bitcoin. But, what are your thoughts on it? Are there any practical applications coming down the path?
Yeah, so I love blockchain. I was previously with a company where we did some stuff with blockchain. It was great to be able to go through that process, go through the patenting process and the IP process and all that. For people who are thinking blockchain is crypto, blockchain is really more, I think of it as a way to work with data in a decentralized, immutable situation. So for me, I think about, okay, all the areas where you want some sort of historical record that is really infallible and immutable. You hear today, right? If you're in the political scene, they're talking about fake news and misinformation, disinformation, all these different things. And I get it, right? Some of the facts, some of the truth within that, it's a lot of subjectivity. Blockchain is a way for areas that don't have subjectivity. So if you think about, I was in the auto industry. If you want to be able to track the ownership of a vehicle or the evolution of maintenance or the leasing of a vehicle or any of those aspects, parts within the vehicle, where no single group owns the data and is going to make it a pay-to-play situation, and at the same time, you want to be able to validate that it's true. Blockchain is a phenomenal technology to be able to do that. I think California passed a law last year or this year that they're moving their home ownership and mortgages into the blockchain. So if you buy a piece of property, if you buy land, you have to do that. I think that's a wonderful idea. You get to maintain some of that history. And let's be honest, anything that can make the federal government or state government go faster, I'm all for.
Well, that was going to be my follow-on question with that. I've been hearing about the mortgage one for years. Some of the early Columbus startups in the blockchain were about how do you get your financing and buy your home all on the blockchain to cut out the enormous amount of paperwork. Anyone that's bought a house knows you sign about 500-page documents. And I was just, what's the holdup? It sounds like it's legislative. It sounds like there's enough requirements from a government standpoint.
I don't know that it's legislative. I think at the end of the day, it becomes a little bit legislative, but there is a secondary working factor. And it's the fact that, there are a lot of companies and interests that have really developed lucrative business models around some of these areas that things like blockchain will disrupt. For example, consider titling, right? So now the next time I try to go buy a house, if any title companies have seen this, right, then I'm probably not going to be able to get that house. But you consider that when you go buy a house, you go through a title company who they ensure that your title is clean, right? Like that's their job. Now, I have run technology for the debt servicing world, and we worked with a variety of mortgage home debtors. I've never seen a debtor who was successful going back to a titling company that made a mistake and holding them accountable. It never happens, but you're paying $500 to $1,500 for a guarantee, but it's really a guarantee of nothing. Something like blockchain, I mean, that entire industry is wiped out, right? There's no reason to do that because I can stand up a viewer, I can look at the the entire history of the property that I'm looking at, and I know that it's immutable, and I know that I don't have to pay to play to see it. So you think about things like titling, MLS, right, within mortgages, those different areas, all those get hugely disrupted. So I guarantee those industries have people being paid very, very handsomely to make sure that that is as slow as possible.
Oh, well, we are coming up on time, and I have so many blockchain questions. I might have to have you back on. I think it's going to be disruptive in my space as well, along with LLMs and some kind of software development, just to do fractional work. Imagine if you're able to put project type stuff out on the blockchain and allow people to do portions of it. But that's
that's really interesting. Well, and I'd be curious with you all doing all these different engineering projects. I assume some of the things like the co-pilots for GitHub and some of these different areas are you finding that these are having just a massive effect or a positive effect on your teams?
it's definitely moving in the right direction. I think the quick answer is sales and marketing are obviously being tremendously impacted. It's been great
Sure.
for us. It summarizes meetings, it gives us notes, it gives us action items better than anything ever has in the past. When you look at the pure play engineering, I have not played with some of the newer models because, as you know, they get released very fast.
Yeah.
But like if you look back at like ChatGPT 3.5 couldn't code itself out of a hat. 4 started to allow you to do some things sometimes. But I haven't played with like the 4.0 model or the new, I think Claude 3.5, Sonic 3.5 came out the other day.
I've heard good things about Claude. The GitHub one I played around with. What I found it was really good for is when you're debugging. If you run into a bug, say, "Hey, help me track this down," and that really makes it faster.
Yeah, we have. I don't know if it's the GitHub one, but I know our team has played with similar tech. Yeah, it is a decent pair programming friend to tell you where you're wrong. I
That's
wouldn't
right.
say that you can't quite say write me this code yet, and it'll write it for you. Like the engineers haven't quite gotten that to work for them yet. So, but it's fun.
I agree. It's the same problem that I think the low code and no code solutions, right? Somebody, they have this grand idea, they go into a low code or no code solution, and it's like, no, I mean, you can do this,
Yeah.
but as soon as you want to get custom, that's where things start to break down.
Awesome. Well, we're gonna have you back on, Jason. I hate to break the news to you because
Oh,
low
I
code's another
appreciate
one
it.
I'd love to chat more about, but we're kind of at that time for today. So thank you so much for joining, Megan. Thank you again for hosting, and thank you to all of our viewers at home. Thank you for logging in and watching our show. As usual, if you have any questions for us or for Jason, please send them over to technicallyspeakingexpeed@gmail.com, and we'll make sure to get you guys an answer. And we just appreciate you guys taking some time today. Jason, again, thank you. Any last thoughts before we leave?
No, just John, Megan, really appreciate the time. Enjoyed the conversation. Hope to do it again.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of the day.